When I think of overt responses, I think of cooking. Do you like to cook? I like to make my own salad dressing. I'm working today on a Dijon vinaigrette. So to elicit overt responses is not just to mix all the ingredients up and hope that it comes out okay. You have to, well, you know, you put a few herbs in. Here's some Italian seasoning. You stir it up, and then you elicit a response. You have to taste it and say, what does it need? A little more of this, a little more of that. Well, certainly if it's going to be Dijon vinaigrette, it needs some Dijon, doesn't it? Let's put some mustard in, okay? Thought it needed a little bit more salt. A little fresh ground pepper. You know, I've always wanted to have a cooking show, but I went into education instead. All right, let's see. You know, interestingly, I wouldn't just elicit a covert response from this. I wouldn't ask it, how you doing, dressing? You know, are you being prepared well? Or I wouldn't just look at it and say, well, it looks like a Dijon vinaigrette. What do? No, I have to, every once in a while, taste it. Elicit an overt response. Really check it so that it can't fool me. You know, this looks pretty good, but it really needs a lot more mustard. I really like, that's the part that I like. So, put some in, stir it up, elicit an overt response. We're getting there. A little more. Stir, teach. It could use a little more pepper too. Get the idea? Teaching is a lot like cooking. You know, we teach a while, 3 or 4 minutes, and then elicit an overt response. Check it. Don't just ask, be sure that you really know. Eliciting overt responses mean that we get data back that helps us to make a decision, but it's real data. It's overt data. It's not to be confused with just how does it look or are there any questions out there. Overt responses, we can learn a lot from cooking about this big idea. Let's take a look at what overt responses might look like in a classroom setting.
These students are learning to count by 5s and 1s by counting chalk drawings of nickels and pennies. The teacher is eliciting an overt response from all the students at the same time, sort of like a chorus. But let's listen to that one more time.
45, 50, 61, 52.
Hear how the chorus loses its harmony when it moves from nickels to pennies? The teacher hears that too, and she knows there's more work to do here. Sometimes teachers elicit overt responses from the whole class or from groups of students, but often the task is comprised of simply moving from individual student to individual student, carefully examining the work of each and every one to see if they have mastered the intended content. It's not the most glamorous part of the job, but it's one of the most important. In this metal shop class, the teacher makes sure this student clearly understands how to operate this hand grinder. You know, if he didn't, someone could get hurt. But this being sure of the learning is no less important in a math or social studies class, is it? Sure, no one will get physically injured if the teacher doesn't carefully check on the learning, but academically, when teachers don't check carefully and often, students can get hurt. They say timing is everything, and that's certainly true of overt responses. These teachers are eliciting overt responses from their students during the lesson, just a few minutes after teaching the material. They're checking to see if students have really learned what has just been taught, or if they're only pretending to have learned. Timing is critical. Teach a little, elicit a response. Teach a little more, check again. These teachers choose to find out how the learning's going now, instead of waiting till later.
As we've watched these teachers interacting with their students, eliciting overt responses, there's some themes that run through all those images. And really we can call them the critical attributes of overt responses. And there are 3: all, overt, during. Think about the images that we saw. Let's look at these critical attributes one at a time. All. First of all, to elicit overt responses, we have to elicit them from all the students. No sampling. You remember sampling. from statistics class. Sampling means I don't elicit responses from all, I just elicit responses from some, and then I extrapolate the data. I ask 3 or 4 students if they understand. I check very carefully, and I say, well, if these understand, then probably everyone else does as well. One of the critical attributes to eliciting overt responses is we elicit them from how many students? All of them. No sampling. Second critical attribute is that the responses must be overt. They can't be covert. So overt means that they're countable. They are something that I can, as a teacher, see it. I can hear it. I can touch it. I can taste it. I can smell it. I can say to myself, yes, they understand. They almost understand. No, they look like they understand, but now that I check, they have no clue as to what they're doing, right? They're overt. They're not covert. I'm not asking them, do you understand? Are there any questions? The second critical attribute is they have to be overt. Third critical attribute, the third theme that runs through those images of pictures eliciting overt responses is when it occurs, during the instruction, not at the end of the lesson. When we think about eliciting overt responses, it's important that we elicit them every 2 or 3 minutes. After every change in activity. Remember making the salad dressing? You don't just taste it at the end. You elicit, you make those little tastes when? During the preparation. Not at the end of the lesson, not at the end of the week, not at the end of the month, not at the end of the unit, certainly not at the end of the year just to see who gets to go to summer school. Those are the three critical attributes to overt responses. All, overt, during. Take a few moments now, and I'd like to ask you to do some processing on this fifth big idea, overt responses. With the people around your processing group, what's the health of this big idea in your classroom, in your school, or in your district? Overt responses. See you back in a couple of minutes. Thank you for your good work and your thoughtful discussions during that processing time. Big idea number 5, overt responses. Now, if we're able to do that, if we're able to elicit quality overt responses, it positions us as teachers to take advantage of perhaps one of the most powerful teaching tools that we know of. And it's really our big idea number 6, mid-course corrections. Let's make that our last essential learning of the program.